He called our $80,000 anniversary party a necessary expense. I didn't know it was his budget for my public execution. He handed me divorce papers in front of 100 guests, calling me his humanitarian burden. He forgot this burden built the foundation he stands on. His mistress laughed. He smirked. They thought they won. They didn't know I have receipts for every lie, and tonight is collection day. My name is Eliza. I am 38 years old, and I am sitting in a room that feels more like a luxurious prison cell than an office. It is a marvel of modern architecture, all glass and brushed steel, cantilevered over the gray, choppy waters of Puget Sound. From here, I can watch the Seattle ferries slide across the water, tiny and silent, like ghosts in the mist. The minimalist desk I sit at is flawless, empty save for a single screen. The chair alone, a masterpiece of ergonomic design, cost more than my first apartment's rent for a full year. Everything in this house is designed to be looked at, not lived in, and I, it seems, am the primary exhibit. On my monitor is the logo for Axiom Dynamics. I am staring at it, trying to remember the person who drew it. I sketched it myself, 10 years ago, on a damp cocktail napkin in a bar that smelled like stale beer and ambition. It's an ascending spiral, clean and optimistic, meant to represent the harmony of ethics guiding technology upward. A decade ago, it was a promise. Today, it feels like a lie. Axiom Dynamics was the company I built with my husband, Julian. We co-founded it. At least, that is the official story we tell the press and our investors. The reality was always more complicated. We were a partnership, yes, but one of distinct and separate halves. Julian, now 42, is the face. He is the brilliant, charismatic salesman, impossibly handsome in his custom-tailored suits, with a smile that has charmed venture capitalists out of hundreds of millions of dollars. He is the one who stands on sun-drenched stages at tech conferences, speaking eloquently about the future of human-machine partnership. He sells the vision with an intoxicating sincerity. I was the one who built the vision. I was the brain. I am the AI ethicist, the strategist who spent agonizing years developing the proprietary algorithms that made Axiom unique. We weren't just another company chasing efficiency. We were the conscience. My code was the firewall against bias, the governor on unchecked machine learning. My work was the core intellectual property, the very soul of the company that Julian so masterfully sold. But for the past 2 years, my role has been quietly, methodically, and surgically altered. It started subtly. Julian began protecting me. That was the word he always used. Eliza, darling, you're running yourself into the ground, he would say, his hands landing on my shoulders, his touch feeling less like affection and more like management. The stress of daily operations, the endless client meetings. It's too much for you. You're the genius. You shouldn't be wasted on spreadsheets. Why don't you step back? Focus on pure research. Be the oracle on the hill. I was tired. I was burning out. And I wanted to believe he was protecting me, that he cherished my mind so much he wanted to preserve it. So I agreed. Pure research quickly became a euphemism for polite isolation. My executive-level access to the company servers was downgraded to a researcher classification. Key meetings that I used to lead were suddenly handled by Julian and his sharp new senior strategy team. My input, once critical, was now merely consulted after the decisions had already been made. Now, I am the oracle on the hill, and like all ancient oracles, I am a prisoner of my own temple. This magnificent house, this $10 million glass box overlooking the water, is my cage. I have become a trophy wife with a doctorate. I am the living proof that Axiom Dynamics still has its original, ethical soul, a fact Julian mentions fondly at board meetings I am no longer invited to. I am an expensive ornament, polished and displayed, but never actually used. The silence in this house is a physical weight, a vacuum where my purpose used to be. Julian himself is barely here. He has become a specter in his own home, a faint scent of expensive cologne and the sound of hurried footsteps on the hardwood floors. The business trips are constant, stretching from weeks into months. Hong Kong, London, New York. He returns exhausted, smelling of recycled airplane air and something else I cannot, or perhaps will not, identify. His excuses are flawless, delivered with that same practiced sincerity. We're landing the biggest contract of our lives. Liza, it's almost done. Just a little longer. The late-night meetings are endless. He comes to bed at 2, sometimes 3 in the morning, or often just retreats to the guest room so he doesn't disturb my sleep. And then there is his phone. That phone is his new partner. It never leaves his person. When he is home, it is never, ever left screen up on a table. It is always face down. If I walk into the room while he's texting, the screen goes dark instantly. The password, which for a decade was our anniversary, is now a complex 6-digit PIN I've watched his thumb trace but cannot decipher. The cold, creeping dread is a constant companion. It's a knot in my stomach that tightens every time he cancels a planned dinner, every time he laughs at a text I am not meant to see, every time he calls me darling with that precise, hollow tone. I try to suffocate the suspicion. I rationalize it. This is the price of success, I tell myself. This is what a billion-dollar valuation requires. He is an ambitious man. I knew that when I married him. I am the one who couldn't keep up. I'm the one who needed protecting. I'm the one who is supposed to be focusing on my research, not worrying about his phone or his schedule. This is the narrative I repeat. A desperate mantra to drown out the screaming voice of my own intuition that I am being systematically, brilliantly, and cruelly played for a fool. My gaze drifts from the Axiom logo back to the gray water, the image blurring. I remember when that logo was real. I remember the acidic smell of stale coffee and the taste of instant noodles in our tiny, cramped studio apartment in Ballard. We had nothing but a shared laptop, a rattling air conditioner, and a whiteboard covered in my equations. We were poor, exhausted, and incandescently happy. We were equals. I remember the night we finally cracked the core framework, the moment the code compiled without a single error. It was 3 in the morning. Julian kissed me, actually kissed me, with a desperate passion I haven't felt in years. He lifted me from my chair and spun me around the tiny room, laughing. He wasn't the polished CEO of Axiom Dynamics then. He was just Julian, wearing a faded college sweatshirt, his eyes bright with a genuine, unfiltered excitement. We're going to change the world. Liza, he whispered against my hair, his voice thick with emotion. You and me, we're going to make technology human. I believed him. I believed in us. We weren't just building a company. We were building a legacy. A soft chime breaks the memory. An email has arrived. It's not from Julian. It's from his executive assistant, a woman I've never met. The subject line is simple, 10th anniversary celebration final planning. My stomach twists. Another performance to prepare for. I look back at the logo on the screen, the one I designed, the ascending spiral. It doesn't look like it's rising anymore. It looks like it's circling a drain. Julian found me in the kitchen a few nights later. His presence in the house before dark had become a rarity, and it immediately put me on edge. He was leaning against the cold marble island, but he seemed to vibrate with a manic energy, a salesman who had just closed a mammoth deal. Darling, he began, and my stomach tightened. That was his selling voice, the one he used for venture capitalists, not for his wife. I've booked it. Our 10-year anniversary. It's handled. Oh, I said, keeping my voice neutral, wiping down a counter that was already clean. I thought we were going to that quiet cabin in the San Juans, the one we always talked about. He waved a hand, a gesture of magnificent dismissal, as if swatting away a fly. Bigger, better. I've secured the Skyview Terrace, the whole place, all hours. My hand stopped moving. I turned to look at him. The Skyview Terrace was not just a venue, it was a declaration. It was a glass-walled fortress floating 50 stories above the city, reserved for tech billionaires and political fundraisers, booked solid for half a decade. Julian, that's impossible, I said. And the cost, it must be astronomical. $80,000, he said, beaming, as if he'd just found a bargain. Just for the deposit in the space, the catering and security will push it well over $100,000, I'm sure. But it's worth every single penny. I stared at him. $80,000 for a party, Julian. We've never been those people. We don't do this. This what? Eliza, this success. His voice lost its manufactured warmth, replaced by a sharp, condescending edge I had grown far too familiar with. It's an investment, Eliza. It's not a party. It's a strategic move. All our major partners will be there. The board, the investors from Singapore. This isn't just about us. It's about perception. It's the launch pad for Act 2 of Axiom. Act 2? I asked, feeling a cold prickle of foreboding. He ignored the question, walking over to me. He didn't kiss me. Instead, he reached out and adjusted the collar of my silk blouse, his touch impersonal, like a stylist dressing a mannequin. I need you to look stunning. Eliza, I mean, truly breathtaking. Get a new dress. Go to Nordstrom. Get whatever you need. I want you to look like the queen you are. He paused, his smile not reaching his eyes. Just don't worry your brilliant head about the little things. I've got this. The little things arrived 3 days later. The doorbell chimed at precisely 10 a.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it to a woman who looked less like a person and more like a concept. She was young, perhaps 28, and radiated an aggressive, almost blinding confidence. She wore a severe, impeccably tailored white pantsuit that probably cost $4,000. Her black hair was cut in a sharp, asymmetrical bob, and her red lipstick was flawless. "Eliza," she said. Her smile was wide, bright, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Serafina, but everyone calls me Sarah. Julian's new senior AI strategist. I'm here to go over the event flow and the seating charts for the anniversary." She said this as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Julian had never mentioned a Serafina. He certainly hadn't mentioned her coming to our home to plan our anniversary party. Come in," I stammered, stepping back. I was suddenly conscious of my cashmere lounge pants and simple t-shirt. I felt like a ghost in my own home. Sarah walked past me, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floors. She didn't look around with the polite curiosity of a first-time guest. She moved with purpose, her eyes scanning the room, cataloging the art, the furniture, the view, as if assessing them for strategic value. "Julian has told me so much about you," she said, turning to face me. Her tone was a masterpiece of social engineering. It was layered with a thin veneer of professional deference, but the overwhelming primary note was one of pity. "It's a genuine honor to meet you. You are such a legend around the office. A legend, a myth, a relic, something that was once important but is now encased in glass." "A new strategist?" I asked, trying to anchor myself. "I haven't been involved in the executive hiring for a while." "Oh, I've been with Julian for about 6 months now," she said breezily. "He headhunted me personally from a competitor. I run point on all new product integration and long-range strategy." She pulled a sleek tablet from her leather tote. "Now, about the party. Julian wants the theme to be legacy and future. We were thinking you are the perfect symbol of the legacy, the foundational work. And, well, we represent the future, the dynamic, forward-moving implementation." She was already using "we," and I was not included in it. She moved past me, heading directly for the kitchen. "Do you mind? I'm absolutely dying for an espresso. Julian showed me how to use this beast of a machine the last time I was here." My blood went cold. The last time she was here, I watched, numb, as she navigated my state-of-the-art kitchen with an effortless, practiced familiarity. She didn't ask where the cups were. She didn't fumble with the built-in grinder. She opened the correct cabinet, selected a cup, and operated the complex, $1,000 espresso machine as if she did it every morning. Just as the machine hissed, Julian himself came down the grand staircase, already in a full suit, knotting his tie. He stopped when he saw Sarah. His entire face lit up. It was not the polite smile he gave investors. It was not the tired, distracted smile he gave me. It was a genuine, unguarded beam of pure pleasure. "Sarah, you're here. Fantastic." "Just walking the legend through the plan," Sarah said, smiling up at him over the rim of my espresso cup. Julian laughed. It was a deep, intimate sound. A shared joke I wasn't privy to. He walked over to her, and she, instinctively, proprietarily, reached up and straightened his tie. Her fingers lingered on his chest for a fraction of a second too long, a tiny gesture of ownership that screamed louder than any confession. "You two are handling this. Then," I asked. My voice sounded thin and reedy in my own home. Julian turned to me, the light in his eyes instantly extinguishing. The mask of the busy, burdened CEO slid back into place. "Yes, darling. Sarah has it all under control. She's my right hand. She's brilliant." This was my moment, my last attempt to breach the wall. "Julian, while you're both here," I said, my voice gaining a desperate firmness, "I need to talk to you about the new Axiom kernel, the one you're rolling out to the banking sector." Sarah's smile tightened by a millimeter. Julian sighed, a sound of profound and weary impatience. "Eliza, now really isn't the time," he said, checking his watch. "I ran a diagnostic from my terminal," I insisted, pushing past his annoyance. "I found something. A critical flaw in the bias recognition protocol. It's not just failing to catch skewed data sets in loan origination. Julian, it's learning to discriminate. It's amplifying the bias. It's a massive, company-ending ethical and legal liability. We have to stop the rollout. Now." There was a heavy, dead silence. Sarah looked at Julian, one perfectly sculpted eyebrow raised, as if to say, "Are you going to handle this? Or shall I?" Julian put his briefcase down. He walked over to me, slow and deliberate, and placed his hands on my shoulders. It wasn't a gesture of comfort. It was a gesture of control. "Sarah's handling it, baby," he said, his voice soft, placating, as if speaking to a difficult, hysterical child. "She and her team ran a full diagnostic. It's fine. The numbers are solid. You're probably just looking at an old build, something isolated in your research cache." "I am not," I said, my voice low and shaking with a quiet rage. "I am looking at the live deployment kernel. I can show you the code." "Eliza," he cut me off, his grip tightening just enough to be a warning. "I appreciate your concern. I really do. But your job is to research. Our job," he gestured between himself and Sarah, "is to execute. We have it handled." "Okay." He kissed my forehead. It was cold, dry, and tasted of betrayal. A seal of dismissal. "Now, please," he said, turning away from me and picking up his briefcase. "Go find a stunning dress for the party. Let us worry about the little things." Sarah gave me a final, pitying smile as she followed him. "It was truly lovely to meet you, Eliza. Your work was foundational. Really. It's what we're all building on." They walked out the front door together, already deep in conversation about their presentation for the following day. Their voices faded as they got into his car, leaving me alone in the cathedral-like silence of my glass-walled prison. The suspicion was no longer a vague, creeping dread. It was a certainty. It was a block of Arctic ice, sharp-edged and heavy, filling my entire chest. This party, this $80,000 extravaganza, was not a celebration of our marriage. It was a stage. It was a carefully produced, high-budget performance, and I had just realized, with chilling, sickening clarity, that I was not the guest of honor. I was the main attraction in a public execution. Sleep was not a possibility. It was not a state I could access. I lay in our cold, cavernous bedroom, the space beside me empty, as it so often was. Julian was working late again. I stared at the ceiling, the moon outside casting long, sterile shadows across the expensive rug. It was 3 a.m. The silence of the house was absolute, broken only by the sound of my own blood rushing in my ears. Sarah's smile was burned into my retinas. That bright, plastic, pitying smile. "You are such a legend." And Julian's voice, that placating, condescending tone he used when I'd found the flaw in the Colonel. Sarah's handling it. Baby. I was not a hysterical child. I was not an isolated researcher looking at an old build. I was the architect of the entire system, and I knew, with the same certainty that I knew my own name, that I was right. The Colonel was compromised, and they were ignoring it. I needed proof, not just for them, but for myself. I needed to see the original framework document I had written, the one that formed the legal and ethical bedrock of axiom dynamics, the one where I had explicitly, in Section 4, Paragraph 2, warned against this exact type of algorithmic bias and outlined the catastrophic consequences. I slid out of bed. The cold hardwood floor was a shock to my feet. I pulled on a robe and went downstairs, not to the kitchen, but to my glass-walled office. I sat in the dark, the monitor's glow illuminating my face. I brought up the Axiom corporate portal. I typed in my credentials. I navigated to the central document repository, and there it was. Access denied. My administrative privileges, the ones I'd had since day one, were gone. Julian hadn't just isolated me. He had neutered me. I was a guest in the company I had built. I tried another route, a back-end server access. Access denied. He had locked me out completely. I leaned back in my chair, the sleek metal cold against my skin. Panic, hot and acidic, began to rise in my throat. He was erasing me. He was making me a non-entity, a legend in every sense of the word, a story from the past, with no bearing on the present. I looked around the sterile, perfect office he had built for me, and then I saw the closet. It was a simple utility closet, paneled in the same seamless, expensive wood as the rest of the walls, designed to be invisible. It held nothing but old networking equipment, dust bunnies, and, I suddenly remembered, our first physical server. We called it the Forge, a ridiculous name. It was a simple beige tower I had built myself from scavenged parts. It held everything from our first 5 years. Our original code, our contracts, our financial models, our private emails. It held our real history. Julian had insisted on migrating everything to a new, state-of-the-art cloud server array 3 years ago. "It's more secure, Eliza," he'd said. "More professional." I knew he'd paid a team to handle the migration, and I also knew that, in his forward-looking arrogance, he would see the Forge as nothing more than a piece of worthless junk. He probably thought it had been disconnected, wiped, and sent to recycling, but he never checked. He never managed the little things. I did. I had left it there, plugged in but disconnected from the main network, a silent, sleeping time capsule. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I walked over to the closet and pressed the hidden latch. The door hissed open. There it was, sitting on the floor in the dark, covered in a thick layer of dust. Its power light was off. I knelt, my hands shaking slightly. I plugged its network cable into a diagnostic port hidden under my desk, a port that bypassed the main network and gave me a direct, internal-only connection. I hit the power button. The sound was a roar in the silent house. The fans, clogged with dust, whined to life. The hard drives clicked and spun. It sounded like a ghost waking up. I ran back to my terminal, opened a secure shell, and connected to the server's raw IP address. A black screen appeared with a single, blinking cursor. Login. I typed in my old administrative credentials. Login incorrect. I tried again. Login incorrect. He had changed them. Even back then, he was planning this. He had locked me out of my own history. I felt a surge of white-hot rage, so pure it almost made me dizzy. He thought he was smarter than me. He always had. But he was just a salesman. I was the architect. I closed my eyes. I thought back. Before the company, before the money, before the lies. He wouldn't have used a complex, randomized password. He would have used something that meant something to him, something that fed his ego, but that he would easily remember. I typed one in. Logan, incorrect. Then I stopped. I was thinking like me, trying to find a shared memory. I had to think like him. What had he forgotten? What detail was so important to me that it would be utterly irrelevant to him? Our first anniversary. We had no money. He had promised to take me to a fancy restaurant, but a client meeting ran late, and he forgot. He came home to find me asleep on the couch, the cheap bottle of wine I'd bought still unopened. He never apologized. He just woke me up to talk about the meeting. I typed in the password, the date of that first forgotten anniversary, June 10th, 2012. The screen flickered. Authentication successful. Welcome, E. Vance. I was in. My fingers flew across the keyboard, the old command line prompts coming back to me instantly. I found the document repository. There it was. Ethical Framework V1 TIDF. I found the kernel flaw. I found everything. I could prove I was right. I was about to download the files and log out when I saw it. In the root directory, there was a partition I had not created. It wasn't labeled ELIZA or Axiom or Archive. It was a simple single-letter X. I tried to access it. Partition encrypted. Enter passphrase. This was new. This was not part of our original system. This was something Julian had created after he'd locked me out, using the old server as his private dumping ground, assuming no one would ever find it. My blood ran cold. He had encrypted it. But what key would he use? It wouldn't be a date. It would be something only he and, oh, God, Sarah, Seraphina, an angel, a fiery, six-winged creature. I knew Julian. He was arrogant, but he was also poetic in his own self-aggrandizing way. I typed in the decryption key. Seraphim. Access denied. I tried again. He was more clever than that. I was the ethicist. I was the legend. He was the future. I tried one more key. It was a word he'd used in a speech once, one I'd written for him, about rising from the ashes of old ideas. Phoenix. The partition unlocked. A list of folders appeared. Contracts, Phoenix. Financials, Delaware. Voice memos, Sarah. Strategy, exit. My breath hitched. I could not feel my hands. I clicked on the last folder. Strategy, exit. Inside, there was a single password-protected document, but the password hint was simple. Her burden. I typed it in. Humanitarian burden. The document opened. It was a timeline, a meticulously planned, multi-page strategy. And then I clicked on the other folders. I opened voice memos, Sarah. My husband's voice filled the silent room, not the public-facing one, but one I hadn't heard in years. It was throaty, intimate, and laughing. He was talking to her. "She's completely in her cage, baby," he was saying, the sound of ice clinking in a glass. "She's so busy researching. She'll never see it coming. By the time the legend figures it out, we'll be in Singapore, and Phoenix will be live." Then I opened the emails. Hundreds of them. Emails between Julian and Sarah. Emails filled with casual, cruel dismissals of me. Emails laying out the timeline for their affair. But it was so much more than an affair. I opened the Contracts Phoenix folder. My heart did not just stop. It felt like it was ripped from my chest. There were patent applications, filed in Delaware, for a new company. A new company built, line for line, on my code. My proprietary ethical algorithms, the work of my entire adult life, stolen, repackaged, and filed under their names. They were not just planning to leave me. They were not just planning to fire me. They were planning a coup. They were building a new company with stolen technology, and they were planning to leave me to take the fall for the old, failing one. The adrenaline hit me like a physical blow, a jolt of electricity that snapped my spine straight. The fog of my grief, my sadness, my confusion, evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, pure, and perfect clarity. I was not a wife being left. I was a founder being robbed. And this was not a breakup. This was war. I sat in the darkness of my office, the only light coming from the glowing screen. The adrenaline from breaching the server had faded, replaced by an icy, profound stillness. The personal sting of the affair, the whispers, the lies, it all seemed trivial now, a petty distraction from the real crime. I was looking at the blueprint for my own execution. It was all there, in meticulously organized folders. Project Phoenix. It was a new corporation, officially registered in the state of Delaware 6 months prior. The articles of incorporation listed a single officer and CEO, Serafina. My mind was no longer racing with betrayal. It was processing data with a cold, analytical precision. I was not a wife anymore. I was a strategist analyzing an opponent's attack. I opened the directories containing the codebase for this new entity. My breath caught, not in a sob, but in a sharp, involuntary gasp. It was my work. It was not just based on my work. It was my work. 12 years of my life, my proprietary ethical frameworks, the complex algorithms that were the entire foundation of Axiom Dynamics. It was all right there. He had taken my life's work. I scrolled, my eyes scanning the familiar lines of code. They had been clever. I had to give them that. They hadn't just copied and pasted. They had reverse-engineered my concepts, refactored the architecture, changed the variable names, and added just enough superficial modifications to claim it as a new, derivative work. It was a brilliant, cynical act of plagiarism, meticulously designed to bypass intellectual property laws. And then I found the patent applications, filed 3 months ago, under their new Delaware entity, inventors Julian Vance and Serafina. My name, the actual creator, was nowhere to be seen. He had stolen the soul of our company and signed his mistress's name to it. The full weight of their plan was beginning to settle on me. They weren't just building a competitor, they were building a replacement, but to launch a new company, especially one of this scale, they needed capital. Significant capital. Julian didn't have that kind of personal liquidity. Axiom did. I navigated to the Financials Phoenix folder. My hands were perfectly steady. I was no longer a person. I was a forensic accountant. I opened the balance sheets. The seed funding for Project Phoenix had come from a series of shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. I didn't recognize the names, but I recognized the payment schedule. I cross-referenced the dates with Axiom's own expenditures, which I still had access to on the old server. And there it was. For 18 months, Julian had been systematically bleeding Axiom Dynamics dry. He had been authorizing massive payments, $500,000 here, $800,000 there to these shell companies, disguising them on Axiom's books as strategic consulting fees and external R&D expenditures. He had siphoned just over $4 million. $4 million of our money. My money. Money earned from the very algorithms he was now stealing. He was using my past successes to finance his new future, a future built entirely on my stolen work. He was gutting the company I had co-founded, hollowing it out from the inside, leaving it a debt-ridden shell, all to build a new lifeboat for himself and his lover. The final piece of the puzzle slotted into place. The party. The $80,000 spectacle. It seemed so nonsensical, so risky, so loud. Why draw that much attention? I found my answer in an email chain between Julian and Sarah in the Strategy E exit folder. The subject was the transition. Sarah had written, "The investors are getting nervous about the kernel flaw you mentioned. We need a clean break, or the Axiom liability will follow us to Phoenix. We have to control the narrative." Julian's reply, sent just last week, made the blood freeze in my veins. "You're right. The party is the perfect pivot. After we ditch the humanitarian burden," I read the words twice. Humanitarian burden, the nickname they had for me. The burden he was protecting from stress. Bile rose in my throat. "At the party, I'll let the news of the divorce settle. We'll leak that she's having a breakdown, that she's unstable. On Monday, we announce Phoenix. The investors and the press won't see it as a theft. They'll see it as a smart, decisive transition away from the legacy technology and the unstable co-founder. They'll see me as a visionary, forced to evolve." I finally understood. The party was not a celebration. It was a strategic asset. It was an $80,000 stage, bought and paid for with my own money, designed for my public humiliation. He was going to sever me from the company in front of the entire industry. He would paint me as the hysterical, discarded wife, a relic of the past. He would use their pity for him as a smokescreen to cover the largest intellectual property theft in our sector's history. By the time I recovered and tried to fight back, who would they believe? The brilliant, grieving CEO who had just launched a new, superior company, or the crazy ex-wife he had so charitably divorced? My grief, the last lingering trace of the wife I had been, evaporated. It solidified, then calcified, then cooled into something dense and heavy as steel. Julian wasn't just leaving me. He wasn't just stealing from me. He was planning to erase me. He was systematically deleting my past, stealing my present, and destroying my future, all to build his own. I looked at the clock. It was 4:32 in the morning. I stared at the email, at the words humanitarian burden, and for the first time in 10 years, my mind was perfectly, completely clear. He thought he was the visionary. He forgot I was the architect, and he had just left me alone in the basement with the original blueprints to his entire demolition. I did not cry. Crying is a biological response to overwhelming emotion, be it pain or joy. What I felt was not an emotion. It was a state change. The person who was Eliza Vance, the wife, the humanitarian burden, had evaporated at 4:32 in the morning. The person left in her place was a different entity entirely, an architect of a different kind. My movements became precise, economical. I spent the next 2 hours in the cold glow of the monitor, not as a victim, but as a collector. I took screenshots of every incriminating email. I captured every line item on the fraudulent balance sheets. I recorded the voice memos, converting them to sterile data files. I made copies of the stolen codebase, the patent applications, the Strategy E exit document. I was meticulous. I partitioned a new, hidden volume on the old server, a place Julian would never think to look. Then I began the data exfiltration, uploading the entire cache, all 2.5 gigabytes of my husband's treachery, to a secure, anonymous cloud host based in Switzerland. Finally, I copied the entire package onto 3 separate military-grade encrypted USB drives. I hid one in a hollowed-out book in my office, one in a fireproof safe, and the third I would carry with me. When I was done, I cleared my footprints. I deleted the server logs, reset the access counters on the X partition, and powered down the forge. The ghost went back to sleep, its secrets now my own. I went upstairs, showered, and slid into bed. Julian's side was still cold. He came in an hour later, smelling of Syrah and expensive whiskey, and collapsed without a word. I lay beside him, my eyes wide open in the dark, my breathing even, my mind a steel trap. At 7 a.m., I got up, I made coffee. When Julian emerged, bleary-eyed and hungover. I smiled at him. It was the same placid, slightly tired smile I had given him for 2 years. "Good morning, darling," I said. My voice was warm. "Morning," he grunted, rubbing his temples. "Julian, I've been thinking," I said, handing him a cup of coffee. "You're right. I've been so stressed, so wound up. This party. I want to be perfect for you. I was thinking I'd fly to New York for a couple of days, visit my old college roommate, hit a few spas, and find a truly spectacular dress, just decompress before the big night." He looked relieved. My instability was resolving itself with a shopping trip. It was perfectly, predictably in character. That's a fantastic idea." "Liza," he said, managing a strained smile. "Yes, you do that. You deserve it. Get something incredible. Get anything you want. Use the black card." "I will," I said. "I'll be back in 2 days. Don't worry about a thing." 3 hours later, I was on a flight to New York. I wasn't going to a spa, and I wasn't visiting a roommate. I was going to war. Diana Hayes did not work in a flashy glass tower office. Her firm occupied a discreet pre-war building in Midtown, with dark wood, old money, and an air of lethal quiet. Diana herself was a woman in her late 50s, impeccably dressed in a severe gray suit, with a face that looked like it had been carved from intelligent granite. Her eyes, magnified slightly by her expensive glasses, were the eyes of a predator that had never, ever lost a kill. She was the most feared and most respected attorney for intellectual property and corporate fraud on the entire East Coast. I sat across from her at a massive mahogany table. I had not called as a potential client. I had called her personal number, given to me years ago by a venture capitalist I had saved from an ethical nightmare, and said, "I have a 9-figure IP theft case, and it's time to collect." Huh. She listened for 45 minutes without a single interruption. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I laid out the facts as I had found them: the stolen algorithms, the Delaware Corporation, the fraudulent patents, the $4 million in siphoned funds. I spoke about Project Phoenix, the e-exit strategy, and the humanitarian burden. When I was finished, I placed one of the encrypted USB drives on the polished wood between us. Diana was silent for a full 10 seconds. She looked at the drive, then at me. A slow, thin smile spread across her face, a smile that held no humor and a great deal of pleasure. "Mr. Vance has a problem," she said, her voice a dry, precise rasp. "He's not just stupid, he's arrogant. And arrogance. Arrogance is the combination we like." She picked up her phone. "Clear my schedule for the rest of the week, and get me Arthur and Keisha. Now!" Diana did not waste time. Her team was assembled within the hour. Arthur, a legendary forensic accountant who looked like a startled owl but moved through balance sheets like a shark, and Keisha, a cybersecurity expert in her late 20s, whose quiet, unassuming presence masked the fact that she was one of the most notorious white-hat hackers in the country. I gave Keisha the second USB drive and the IP address for The Forge. "He used this as his private server," I said. "He's arrogant. He thought I was just a legend he'd locked in a cage. I'm certain there's more. Find everything." Keisha's fingers were already moving on her laptop, her eyes lighting up. "Oh, I will." Arthur took the financial data I'd pulled. $4 million is just what you found," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "The roaches are never just in one part of the kitchen. I'll follow the money. I will create a map of his theft so simple and so irrefutable that a child could present it in court." For the next 48 hours, we worked. We were a well-oiled machine. Arthur's map of Julian's financial crimes grew, spiderwebbing out from Axiom to the Caymans, then rerouting back to Delaware. Keisha was a ghost in the machine. She didn't just access the old server. She used it as a beachhead to pivot into Axiom's new cloud servers, using Julian's and Sarah's own credentials, which she'd harvested from The Forge. "He's not just locking you out, Eliza," she reported on the second day, her voice tight with professional anger. He's been actively planting a false digital trail, modifying server logs to make it look like your credentials were the last ones to access the compromised kernel. This was the plan. The final stroke. He would humiliate me at the party, and then, when the kernel flaw inevitably blew up, he would use the logs he'd faked to pin the entire disaster, the end of the company, on me. Diana slammed her hand on the table. Good. Perfect. She stood and began to pace. Here is what we are going to do. We are not going to send a cease and desist. We are not going to file an injunction. We are not going to send a single warning letter. That is what he expects. He wants us to. It would give him time to hide the money and destroy the evidence. She stopped and looked at me, her eyes gleaming. No, we are going to do nothing. You are going to go back to Seattle. You are going to go to your $80,000 party. You are going to wear your spectacular dress. She leaned in. We are going to let this arrogant little man do exactly what he plans to do. We are going to let him stand up on that stage he built, in front of all his partners and investors, and execute himself. A new kind of energy filled me, cold and powerful. What's the signal? There is no signal, Diana said. My team and I will be in Seattle. We will be at the venue. You just live out the night. Let him play his hand. When he hands you those divorce papers, that's when we move. We will serve him and his mistress, right there, in front of everyone. We will serve the investors. We will freeze every asset he has ever touched. I flew back to Seattle that evening. Julian picked me up at the airport, my arms full of shopping bags from stores I had not entered. I had, however, purchased a $10,000 emerald green dress, a color that symbolized, to me, both renewal and poison. You look wonderful, Liza, he said, kissing my cheek, rested. I feel wonderful, I said, my smile bright and genuine. For the next week, I was the perfect, oblivious wife. I sat with the event planner. I approved the floral arrangements, white lilies, funereal and fragrant. I tasted the canapes. I discussed the napkin folds. Julian would watch me, a strange, pitying fondness in his eyes. He thought he was watching a lamb, happily choosing the seasoning for its own slaughter. He had no idea he was looking at the butcher. It was 1 week before the party. 1 week before my public execution, I was in the master bedroom, which I had reclaimed as my own, looking at the emerald green dress hanging on the wardrobe. It was a beautiful, venomous thing. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a secure, encrypted conference call from Diana. I answered. Eliza here. Diana and Keisha are on. Diana's voice said, sharp and immediate. Keisha, report. I'm in. Keisha's voice was quiet, but it was humming with a high-frequency tension I hadn't heard before. I'm past his firewalls, past Saraz, and I am deep inside the active live Axiom cloud network. I've been watching their real-time communications. And, Diana pressed. And I found something, Keisha said. It's not just IP theft anymore. It's worse. So much worse. I sat down on the edge of the bed. The silk of my robe felt cold against my skin. Well, what did you find? Keisha. While I was mapping their internal file structure, Keisha explained. I found a directory that shouldn't exist. It was triple encrypted, buried 5 layers deep, and named with a simple string of random numbers. It wasn't on the old server. This is new. This is their active command and control folder. It took me 12 hours to crack. Inside are their private notes on the kernel flaw. The one I found, I said, my voice flat. The very one. Eliza. But they didn't call it a kernel flaw. They had a code name for it. Prometheus, Keisha said. The blood in my veins seemed to slow, turning to sludge. Prometheus, the god who stole fire from the heavens and was punished for eternity. Julian's poetic, arrogant bullshit. What about it? Diana asked. We know they're ignoring it. They're not just ignoring it. Diana. Keisha's voice was now a deadly whisper. They know exactly what's causing it, and it's not just amplifying bias. That's the superficial layer, the flaw itself. It's a backdoor. I stood up. A backdoor. It's the flaw you warned them about years ago. Eliza, Keisha said, her words coming faster now. The one you said was theoretically possible if they prioritized speed over security. It allows an authenticated user with mid-level credentials to escalate their privileges to full system administrator. Full root access. A horrifying, cold logic began to dawn on me. Keisha, is it being exploited? There was a heavy pause. I could hear the click of her keyboard. Yes, actively. For the last 2 months. Someone, or something, is using that Prometheus vulnerability. They are inside Axiom's most sensitive client databases. We're talking all of them. The Fortune 500 clients, the banks, the healthcare providers. Who? My voice was barely a whisper. The IP addresses are masked, bouncing through a dozen countries, Keisha said. But the digital fingerprints, the methodology, it's a known signature. It's a state-sponsored actor, a hostile foreign government. Eliza, they are not just in the system. They are living there. They are siphoning terabytes of sensitive, proprietary data from our biggest clients. And Julian and Sarah. They know. My legs gave out. I sat back down on the bed, my head in my hands. This wasn't just fraud. This was a catastrophic national security breach. How do you know they know? Diana's voice was like a shard of ice. Because, Keisha said, her voice filled with a cold fury. I'm looking at their internal assessment, dated 3 months ago. They discovered the breach. They ran the numbers. They calculated that the cost of shutting down the network, fixing the flaw, and reporting the breach to the SEC and their clients would be, and I'm quoting, financially terminal. It would bankrupt Axiom and make them personally liable. So, what did they do? I asked, though I already knew the answer. They decided to cover it up. The room was silent. I could hear my own heartbeat, a frantic, trapped bird in my chest. They decided, Keisha continued, to let the breach continue, undetected. They would let the foreign government keep stealing their clients' data, all while they fast-tracked Project Phoenix as their lifeboat. They were going to scuttle the ship with everyone clients, investors, and employees still on board. And then, Keisha delivered the final killing blow. That's not even the worst part. Eliza, I looked up, staring at my own pale reflection in the mirror opposite the bed. What is the worst part, Keisha? The frame job, she said. I found the digital trail they were building, the one I saw traces of on the old server. It's fully implemented on the live network now. They've been using your old, high-level administrative credentials, the ones they protected you from, to create a false log. They've been manufacturing evidence, piece by piece, for the last 3 months. She took a shaky breath. The plan was to let the breach be discovered about a month after the divorce, after Phoenix was launched and funded. And when it was, all of the logs, all of the modified access files, they all point to one person as the source of the cover-up. They point to you, Eliza. They've created a perfect, irrefutable digital trail that proves you discovered the breach. You actively covered it up, and you were the one criminally negligent. The full, monstrous, breathtaking scope of his plan was finally clear. It was a masterpiece of sociopathic strategy. Act 1. The party. Publicly humiliate and divorce me, painting me as unstable, a humanitarian burden. Act 2. The launch. Announce Project Phoenix, a safe, secure, next-generation platform, and move all the clients and investors over. Act 3. The discovery. Let the Prometheus flaw blow up, destroying what was left of Axiom. Act 4. The execution. Pin the entire criminal cover-up, the breach, the data theft, the federal crimes on the unstable ex-wife who was already gone. He would be a hero, a visionary who got out just in time. I would be a federal criminal, the legend who destroyed the company. He wasn't just leaving me, he wasn't just robbing me, he was going to bury me alive. He was going to bury me in a federal prison and dance on my grave. The phone was silent for a long moment. Then, Diana spoke. Her voice was no longer the voice of a civil attorney. It was something else. It was the voice of a federal prosecutor. "This is no longer a divorce," she said, her words cold and sharp as a scalpel. "This isn't even just corporate fraud. This is securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy. And given the client data and the foreign entity involved, this is a clear-cut, multi-billion-dollar violation of the Economic Espionage Act. This is a federal crime of the highest order." She paused. "We have him. We have them both." I stood up from the bed. I walked to the window and looked out at the cold, gray waters of the Puget Sound. I felt nothing. The rage, the grief, the pain, it had all burned away, leaving behind something terrifyingly calm. It was the absolute, pure, and serene focus of a star collapsing into itself, just before it goes supernova. "Diana," I said, my voice perfectly level. "Change the plan." "What do you mean, your team?" I said. "Serving him at the party. It's not enough. A restraining order on his assets. It's not enough. This is not a civil matter. You just said so." "What are you proposing, Eliza?" "I'm proposing we let him play out the night just as we planned," I said, watching a ferry slide silently across the water. "But you're not bringing a process server. You're bringing the full weight of the United States government." I stood in the master dressing room, the emerald green dress clinging to my body as if it were woven from liquid poison. It was a staggering, beautiful thing, and it had cost Julian $10,000. His money, which was my money. I looked at my reflection in the three-way mirror, but I was not admiring the fit. I was practicing. I relaxed my jaw, allowing my mouth to tremble ever so slightly. I let my shoulders slump, just enough to suggest a crushing weight. I practiced widening my eyes, a look of fragile confusion, of a woman desperately trying to hold back tears. It was the face of a victim. It was the face of a legend being put out to pasture. It was the perfect mask of the humanitarian burden he was so eager to discard. Across town, in a secure, bug-swept suite at the Four Seasons that served as their temporary war room, Diana Hayes was not practicing a performance. She was finalizing the opening salvo of a federal case. While I was modeling my costume, Diana and her team were collating the exhibits for the Department of Justice, the SEC, and the FBI. Keisha had prepared her packet a complete annotated digital schematic of the Prometheus backdoor, the undeniable logs of the foreign government's data theft, and the pristine, faked digital trail Julian and Sarah had so carefully constructed to frame me. The evidence was no longer just a collection of files. It was a narrative, a story of staggering criminal arrogance. 2 nights before the party, Julian found me in the grand, silent living room, staring out at the lights on the water. He seemed almost tender, a strange, paternal sadness in his eyes. It was not guilt. It was the anticipatory grief a man feels for a decision he believes is both necessary and tragic. He was mourning the good man he had to stop pretending to be. "Eliza," he said, his voice soft. He was holding a slim, dark blue velvet box. "I wanted you to have this before the party." He opened it. Inside, nestled on black satin, was a river of diamonds. A necklace. It was ostentatious, impossibly bright, and must have cost a fortune. "Julian, it's too much," I whispered. This part was not an act. "Nothing is too much," he said, his voice thick with that practiced, stage-managed sincerity. He moved behind me and fastened the clasp. The diamonds settled against my skin. They were heavy and astonishingly, agonizingly cold. "For the 10 best years of my life. Eliza, you deserve this. You deserve everything." He kissed the top of my head, a chaste, dismissive blessing. I touched the diamonds, their coldness a perfect anchor. It's beautiful, Julian. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, he whispered. Just wear it. Wear it and be proud of what we built. He smiled, satisfied, the price of his absolution paid. He had given his burden a final, beautiful gift before casting her off. At that same moment, in that hotel suite across town, Arthur, the forensic accountant, was placing his own final report on Diana's desk. It was not a river of diamonds, it was a river of black and red ink, a detailed cartography of a decade of financial high crimes. He had not only confirmed the $4 million I had found, he had found 8. He had tracked the complex web of falsified invoices, laundered consulting fees, and shadow payments, all siphoned from Axiom Dynamics. He had the complete, irrefutable map of Julian's theft, a step-by-step schematic that showed exactly how he had used my work to fund his escape plan. It was not a summary of the 10 best years of his life. It was a 10-year indictment. Diana had the legal and federal angles locked down. But I knew Julian. He lived and died by public perception. His entire plan hinged on controlling the narrative. I would not let his version of this story be the only one told. I made one last, personal move. David Foster was an investigative reporter for the Wall Street Journal. He was a Pulitzer finalist, a man who had built his career on eviscerating tech companies that believed they were above the law. He had been sniffing around Axiom for months, sensing smoke but never finding the fire. I knew he suspected Julian of cooking the books, but he could never get close enough to prove it. I contacted him through an anonymous, encrypted email address. We met for exactly 5 minutes in a noisy, crowded coffee shop downtown. He was wary, skeptical, his eyes sharp. "You said you had information about Axiom," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. I didn't give him the evidence. Not yet. I just looked him in the eye. "I'm Eliza Vance." His expression flickered. He knew who I was. The recluse, the co-founder, the legend. My husband, Julian, is throwing me a 10-year anniversary party on Saturday night, at the Skyview Terrace. I pushed a simple, elegant invitation across the table. "I'm inviting you as my +1. His eyes narrowed. "I don't do society reporting, Ms. Vance." "I know," I said, my voice low. "You do corporate malfeasance. My husband plans to publicly divorce me at that party as a smokescreen for the largest case of intellectual property theft and securities fraud you have ever seen, and that's not even the worst of it." I stood up. "Come to my party, Mr. Foster. Be my guest. Keep your recorder on. You will get the story of your life." I left him sitting there. I knew he would come. I returned to the glass prison. Julian was on the phone, laughing, deep in conversation with Sarah about the seating chart. He muted the call when he saw me. "Hey, darling, all set?" he asked. "All set," I smiled. "Good. The planner was just finalizing the list. It says you have a +1. Is that your old roommate?" "No," I said, walking to the kitchen to pour a glass of water, my back to him. "Just an old friend from graduate school. You wouldn't know him. David Foster." He didn't even register the name. "Great," he said, unmuting the phone. "Okay, Sarah, I'm back. Now, about the investors' table." He was too arrogant, too focused on his own narrative, his own brilliant, final move. He was too busy imagining his victory to ever inspect the weapon I was placing directly in his hand. The night before the party, the final night of my old life, Julian slept in the guest room. He said he had an early start and didn't want to wake me. I knew he was coordinating with his mistress, the two of them whispering about their imminent triumph. I did not sleep. I stood on the balcony of my cold, beautiful house, wearing my silk robe, the $10,000 dress hanging inside, a silent promise. I watched the black water of the Puget Sound far below. For 2 years, I had been a ghost in this house, a victim of my own success, a humanitarian burden fading into the expensive architecture. But tonight, I was not a ghost. I was not a wife. I was not a victim. Julian was sleeping soundly, dreaming of his new empire. I was awake. I was steady. I was an executioner, calmly watching the dark sky, waiting for the sun to rise on the day of the reckoning. The Skyview Terrace was not a room. It was a statement. When the private elevator doors opened, we stepped not into a venue, but into the sky itself. 50 stories above Seattle, the walls were seamless, floor-to-ceiling glass, and the city glittered below us like a carpet of fallen stars. The air was thick with the scent of white lilies and expensive perfume. A string quartet played somewhere, the music a delicate silver thread weaving through the low, confident murmur of voices. 100 of the most powerful people on the West Coast were here. I saw the CEO of our largest banking client laughing by the champagne fountain. I saw 2 state senators in deep conversation with the venture capitalists who had funded our Series B round. They were all here, sipping vintage champagne, bathed in the soft architectural lighting, witnessing the celebration of the lie we had built. And at the center of it all was Julian. He was magnificent. He was a sun, and everyone else was a planet pulled into his orbit. He wore a custom tuxedo, his smile dazzling, his hand firmly on the back of his new partner. Serafina. She was a vision in a sea of polite black and navy. She wore a dress of shocking, vibrant crimson. It was a column of scarlet silk that clung to her as if it had been sewn onto her body. It was not the dress of a senior strategist. It was the dress of a new queen, a statement of arrival. She stood beside Julian, not behind him, her hand resting possessively on his arm. She was playing the part of the hostess, the true mistress of the event, and she was not subtle about it. Julian saw me. His face lit up with that performative, pitying fondness. He walked toward me, pulling Sarah with him. "Eliza, darling," he said, his voice projecting for the people nearby. He kissed my cheek, his lips dry. "You look breathtaking. That dress, perfect." "Thank you, Julian," I said, my voice steady. The cold diamonds on my neck were my anchor. Sarah's eyes raked over me, from the $10,000 dress to the diamonds. Her smile was a tight red slash of practiced sympathy. She reached out and, in a gesture of agonizing, performative intimacy, she took my hands in hers. Her hands were warm. Mine were ice cold. "Eliza," she said, her voice a low purr of condescension. "I'm so glad you're here. I want to thank you for everything, for building the foundation. You are a true inspiration to all of us. Really, us." The word hung in the air. Legend. Foundation. Past. I smiled. It was the smile I had practiced in the mirror. Fragile, polite, and completely hollow. I gently extracted my hands from hers. "Thank you, Serafina. That's very kind. You look stunning as well. Red is certainly your color." I held her gaze. "You should enjoy this evening. Every minute of it. I think you'll find it very memorable." Her smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second. She could not decipher the tone. Was it a concession? A threat before she could respond? An investor pulled Julian away. "You're amazing," Julian whispered to Sarah, loud enough for me to hear, handling her so gracefully. I turned away, my mask firmly in place, and scanned the room. My first asset was in place. David Foster, the reporter, was standing near the edge of the terrace, looking not at the view, but at the crowd. He was dressed in an ill-fitting suit, nursing a club soda, a beacon of sober observation in a sea of curated excess. I walked over to him. "David, I'm so glad you could make it." He gave a curt nod. "Eliza, quite the party." "Julian," I said, motioning to my husband, who was now holding court by the champagne tower, Sarah's laughter tinkling beside him. "I'd like to introduce you to my old friend, David Foster." Julian turned, his focus pulled from his adoring audience. He gave David a 1-second glance, sizing up the cheap suit and the aura of insignificance. He did not recognize the name. He saw no value, no threat. "Great to have you," Julian said dismissively, already turning back to his conversation. "Enjoy the night." "He's all yours," I murmured to David. David Foster simply nodded, his eyes sharp. He melted back into the shadows of the room, a ghost with a recorder, his gaze fixed on Julian. One weapon was armed. Now, for the other. My heart was beating a slow, steady, heavy rhythm. I scanned the periphery, past the curated crowds, toward the long, marble-topped bar near the entrance. And I saw them. They had entered without fanfare, not as guests, but as patrons. Diana Hayes, looking like a high-powered CEO in a perfectly tailored black pantsuit, her sharp, granite features composed. Beside her was a tall, nondescript man in a simple, dark suit. He had the bland face and watchful, empty eyes of someone whose job it is to be invisible until the precise moment they are not. He was, as Diana had promised, a U.S. federal marshal, detached from the Seattle office. They were not looking at me. They were not looking at Julian. They were calmly ordering drinks from the bartender, 2 expensive glasses of scotch. They were just 2 more powerful people in a room full of them, blending in perfectly. Diana raised her glass to her companion, took a small, measured sip, and then her eyes, cold and patient, swept the room. She was a shark, circling, waiting for the blood in the water. She knew the plan. Keisha was in a van 2 blocks away, her fingers on the keyboard, ready to execute the digital freeze on every account. Arthur had already filed his affidavits. The warrants were signed and waiting. All that was needed was the signal, and the signal was Julian himself. I turned back to the room. The string quartet finished a piece by Vivaldi. The polite applause was scattered. The low murmur of powerful deals and quiet gossip resumed. I looked at the delicate watch on my wrist, a gift from Julian from a lifetime ago. The diamond hands swept toward the hour. 8 o'clock. It was time. The clinking of silverware on porcelain faded. The polite, self-congratulatory murmur of the room dissolved into an expectant hush. The string quartet had finished, and a single brilliant white spotlight cut through the dim, ambient lighting of the Skyview Terrace, finding Julian as he stepped onto the low stage. He was radiant. He held the microphone with the practiced ease of a rock star, his smile intimate, as if he were sharing a secret with each of the 100 people in the room. 10 years, he began, his voice warm and resonant, filling the silent space. 10 years ago, Axiom Dynamics wasn't even a dream. It was a few lines of code on a used server, in a studio apartment. He paused, letting the humble beginnings story land. "We didn't just want to build a company," he continued, his gaze sweeping over the rapt faces of the investors. "We wanted to build a conscience. We wanted to build a legacy." I watched the crowd. They were captivated. The senators were nodding gravely. The venture capitalists were smiling, congratulating themselves on their foresight. They were drunk on his vision, on the $80,000 champagne, on the sheer, intoxicating aura of his success. "And we did," he said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more serious. "Axiom Dynamics became the gold standard, the foundation, the legacy." He let that word hang in the air. But legacy, my friends, is a beautiful, beautiful word for an anchor. And in our world, if you are not evolving, you are dying. To truly move forward, to truly evolve, we must be willing to shed the past. A few people clapped, the sound sharp and enthusiastic. I recognized them as Sarah's new strategy team. The rest of the room was quiet, sensing the pivot, waiting to see where this visionary was taking them. Then, he turned. The spotlight followed his gaze, and suddenly, it was on me. I was pinned to my chair, a specimen under a microscope. Julian's expression shifted into one of profound, tragic sympathy. It was a masterful performance. "And that," he said, his voice thick with fake emotion, "brings me to my partner, my wife, Eliza." You could have heard a tear drop. The silence was absolute, heavy, and cold. The woman who was there from the very beginning, the heart of that legacy, he said. He looked right at me, his eyes empty of everything but a cold, final calculation. But as anyone in this room knows, when a rocket truly takes off, when it aims for the stars, you have to make hard choices. You have to cut away the spent fuel stages. He paused, letting the metaphor sink in. The parts that got you off the ground, but are just dead weight that cannot, will not, make the final journey to orbit. A sound, a single, collective, sharp intake of breath from 100 people. It was louder than a scream. The air in the room didn't just get cold, it froze. I saw the banking CEO's wife put her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with exquisite, horrified shock. I saw the senators staring, their political smiles frozen, unsure of the protocol for a public crucifixion. Julian smiled. "No," he laughed, a short, sharp, triumphant bark, as if he'd just delivered the punchline to a brilliant joke that only he understood. The spotlight followed him as he stepped off the stage. He was walking toward me. Each step on the imported marble floor was amplified in the crushing silence. He was moving with purpose, a predator closing in. Halfway to my table, a young woman Sarah's personal assistant intercepted him. She was holding a dark, richly bound leather portfolio. She handed it to him with a reverent, downcast gaze, as if she were a page boy handing a sword to a king. He took it. He did not break his stride. He reached my table. I sat perfectly still, my hands in my lap. I could feel the cold weight of the diamonds on my neck. He looked down at me, his face a mask of patronizing pity. And then, with a casual, dismissive flick of his wrist, he tossed the leather portfolio onto the table in front of me. It landed with a soft, heavy thud on my dessert plate, scattering the remnants of a raspberry sorbet. "Here are the divorce papers, Eliza," he said. His voice was no longer the warm, projecting baritone from the stage. It was a low, venomous whisper, meant just for me. But the lapel microphone he still wore was live, carrying every single contemptuous word to the silent, breathless room. "I'm upgrading," he said, his lip curling in a smirk. "The company is upgrading. We are upgrading." He leaned in closer. "Good luck finding someone. At your level." It was done. The execution. He turned from me, his back a final, definitive statement of dismissal, and as if on cue, Serafina stood up. The crimson dress was a slash of blood in the frozen room. She moved not with hesitation, but with a fluid, predatory grace. She walked directly to Julian, who was now standing in the center of the room, bathed in the spotlight. She reached him. She did not comfort him. She did not touch his arm. She took his hand. She stood beside him, lifting her chin, a triumphant, proprietary smile on her red lips. The spotlight widened, embracing them both. The tableau was complete. The king and his new queen, standing over the body of the old. The past was shed. The future was here. From a table in the back, near the bar, a smattering of applause broke out. It was sharp, loud, and confident. Sarah's team, the Project Phoenix engineers, the new guard, the rest of the room, the investors, the politicians. The clients remained utterly, painfully silent, trapped in a moment of profound social and professional horror. I saw David Foster. He had moved from the shadows. He was standing 20 feet away, his phone held up, steady, the small red light on, filming the entire grotesque performance. He panned from Julian and Sarah, the new power couple, to the investors' frozen faces, and then, finally, to me. I did not cry. I did not move. I did not look at him. I did not look at the crowd. I simply lowered my gaze, calm and steady, and stared at the dark leather portfolio sitting in the ruins of my dessert. I looked at the leather portfolio, its expensive grain smeared with the pink remains of my dessert. The entire room, all 100 guests, was a silent, frozen tableau. They were waiting. They were waiting for the humanitarian burden to burst into tears, to scream, to collapse. They were waiting for the hysteria Julian had scripted. I lifted my head. I looked past the divorce papers and locked eyes with my husband. I did not cry. I smiled. It was not the fragile, practiced smile I had worn all week. This one was new. It was bright. It was wide. And it was terrifying. I felt the cold river of diamonds on my neck, and my smile felt just like them. It was the smile of a predator that has just watched its prey walk calmly and stupidly into a steel trap. Julian's look of tragic, practiced pity evaporated. His smirk faltered. This was not the scene he had directed. Slowly, deliberately, I picked up my untouched glass of champagne. I stood up, the emerald dress flowing around me. I did not walk away. I did not run. I walked toward the stage he had just desecrated, my heels clicking, a steady, unhurried rhythm on the marble. The confused spotlight found me and bathed me in white. I stepped onto the platform. I took the microphone from its stand. The metal was cool and solid in my hand. "Thank you, Julian," I said. My voice did not tremble. It was clear, crisp, and amplified, filling every corner of the 50-story glass box. "Thank you for making things so perfectly clear." I looked at him, standing in the center of the room with his new queen. "You talk about upgrading," I said, my voice light, almost conversational. "You talk about evolution. But you seem to have forgotten the most fundamental rule of architecture. You can't upgrade the penthouse when the foundation is rotten. And you are the rot." His face, which had been so full of smug pity, darkened with a flash of pure, violent rage. "Eliza," he hissed, taking a step toward me. "Get off the stage. You're embarrassing yourself." He was coming to take the microphone, to silence the burden. I held up one hand. A simple, declarative stop. No. The word was not a plea. It was a command, and it stopped him cold. "No, Julian," I said, my smile hardening. "I have been your legend. I have been your foundation. I have sat quietly in my cage for 2 years. Now, I will speak." I turned my gaze from him and swept it across the room, landing on the stunned faces of our investors. "Julian spoke of spent fuel stages," I said, my voice ringing with a new, hard clarity. "He spoke of dead weight. An interesting metaphor. So let's talk about the real next stage he has been building. Shall we?" I raised my glass slightly. "Let's talk about Project Phoenix." The name hit the room like a sonic boom. Julian's face did not just pale, it turned white, a waxy, bloodless, horrifying white. Beside him, Sarah, in her garish crimson dress, looked as if she had been struck. Her hand flew to her throat, her knuckles white. "You don't recognize the name?" I asked the silent crowd. "Oh, you will. It's a brand new corporation, registered in Delaware. Its CEO, Serafina, right here." The crowd murmured, all eyes turning on the woman in red, who now looked like a cornered animal. "But a new company needs capital," I continued, beginning to pace the stage, owning it. "And it needs a product. So let's talk about the $4 million. Oh, wait, forgive me. My forensic accountant found $8 million. The murmuring from the investors' tables was no longer confused. It was low and angry. $8 million, I repeated. Siphoned directly from Axiom Dynamics, laundered through Cayman shell companies to fund this new venture. And what is this visionary new product? What breakthrough technology does Project Phoenix run on? I stopped pacing and locked eyes with Julian. It runs on my intellectual property, my ethical frameworks, my algorithms, my code, stolen, line for line, reverse engineered, and filed for patent under their names. As the word stolen echoed in the room, a new sound began. It was a soft bzzzt, then another, and another, a cascade of digital chimes and vibrations. Across the room, in the pockets and purses of senators, of CEOs, of investors, 100 phones began to light up. David Foster, standing near the wall, calmly lowered his phone. He had just hit send. The CEO of our largest banking client pulled his phone from his jacket. His eyes widened in disbelief. "My God!" he whispered, thrusting the screen at the person next to him. I could see the headline on that glowing screen, a news alert pushed to every major player in the city. Axiom Dynamics CEO Julian Vance accused of multi-million-dollar fraud, massive IP theft. "But it's not just theft," I said, my voice dropping, cutting through the rising chaos. "He didn't just steal from me, he stole from you." I pointed to the banking CEO. "And from you." "And finally," I said, my voice now a deadly quiet hiss that the microphone amplified with terrible intimacy. "Let's talk about the legacy he's leaving behind for all of us. Let's talk about the Prometheus vulnerability." The room noise died instantly. Dead silence. "Let's talk about the catastrophic security backdoor in Axiom's live network, the one I found, the one I warned him about. The one he and Sarah discovered was being actively exploited by a hostile foreign government." The room erupted. It was not a gasp. It was a roar. The senators were on their feet. The investors were screaming. What did she say? "Our data. He knew." I shouted over the pandemonium. "He knew your proprietary data, your client data, was being stolen by the terabyte, and instead of fixing it, he chose to cover it up. He chose to let the ship sink while he built his new lifeboat with your money. And the best part?" I added, my voice ablade. "He created a perfect false digital trail to frame me for the entire criminal conspiracy." That was what broke him. The last vestige of the charming CEO vanished, replaced by a cornered, feral animal. With a primal scream of pure, incoherent rage, he lunged, not for the stage, but directly at me. "You bitch." He never had a chance. Two figures moved from the bar with a speed that was fluid and terrifying. The bland, dark-suited man, the federal marshal, intercepted Julian's lunge. In one clean, brutal motion, he had Julian's arm twisted behind his back, forcing him to his knees on the marble floor. All the shouting stopped. The air was sucked from the room. Diana Hayes stepped out of the shadows and into the spotlight. She was no longer a guest. She was an executioner. She held up a thick packet of federal documents. "Julian Vance," she declared, her voice cracking through the room like a whip. "You are hereby served with a federal injunction and an emergency asset freeze for violations of the Economic Espionage Act and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Every account, every server, every asset held by you, Serafina, or Project Phoenix is now seized by order of the United States government." The marshal hauled Julian to his feet, his handsome face purple and contorted, sputtering curses. Sarah was frozen, a statue in a red dress, her face a white mask of pure, abject ruin. I walked to the very edge of the stage, looking down at the man who had called me his burden. I raised my glass of champagne. "Happy 10th anniversary, darling," I said, my voice clear and bright. I smiled, that terrible, radiant smile, full of teeth. "You chose her, so I chose your ruin." Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are all listening from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Do not forget to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, Like this video, and show your support by smashing that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.